Today I want to talk about the issue of collective or group karma. A lot of us have heard and know about the general idea of karma that we find in Indian culture generally and in Buddhism in particular. But there's this other concept of collective or group karma that some of us may have questions about. You may have heard about this concept, this idea, or have thought about it. So what we're going to discuss today is, first of all, what is it? Second of all, do we find this kind of collective or group karma in early Buddhism in particular? Third, is there any sense we can make of this concept within a Buddhist framework? What kind of sense can we make of it? And then last, what I want to do is to look at ways that we can sort of reconcile the idea of individual karma, the karma that accrues to people, to particular persons, versus this idea of collective or group karma. And in this video I've been helped by a number of really good essays by Peat, by Richard Hayes, a video by Bhante Sujato. As always, I'll leave all references down in the notes, in the notes box below the video. So first, to begin with, what is the idea of group karma or collective karma? This is the idea that karmic results accrue not just to individuals, but also to groups of people. Let's say families or corporations or countries or cultures. Any way you can think of a group, teams, sports teams perhaps, any way that you can think of a group of people, karma might accrue to them as members of that group. But here it's critically important to keep two ideas separate. Bruce Reichenbach calls them conjunctive karma and true group karma. These are separate ideas, and again, we can't confuse the two. Conjunctive karma is the idea that we get in any kind of traditional Indian religion, in Buddhism as well. It's the idea that a group of people can indeed get karmic results because they work together. So, for example, we might think of a brawl outside, right? We have a large group of people, all of them involved in the same fight, which we consider a brawl, right? And yes, each member who is involved in that brawl is a member of a group that's getting karma together, but the reason they're getting that karma together is that each of them independently is intending and performing certain kinds of actions, certain kinds of harmful actions to one another. And so because each of them individually is doing something karmically important, they'll all also get the results of that karmic action. Now this is conjunctive karma. This is not true group karma. Group karma, or collective karma, on the other hand, is this idea that one gains karmic results simply by being a member of a particular group, even if one did not individually intend the actions that were punished or rewarded. Here we can think of the ideas of collective punishment or of collective guilt. Richard Hayes, in his paper that I link down below, mentions the case of the Hebrew prophets, who talk in the Bible about how the children of the sinner will receive the punishment for the sins of their fathers, this sort of thing. So to return to conjunctive karma again, in conjunctive karma, the group is constituted by its members. The group is just those members, and if a member changes, the group is an entirely different group, because each member independently is intending the action. But in true group or collective karma, the group or the collective is not constituted by its members. That is to say, members will change over time, and yet the group is the same. We can think once again of nations. People die and are born, and yet the nation stays the same. Or sports teams, same thing. Players come and go, it's the same team. So in that sense, the people who receive the punishment or the results of the action may be quite different from the people who intended or did the action. So, for example, we might think of the case of General Electric, a large corporation that put PCBs into the water of Hudson River back, I believe, in the 1960s, let's say. The case may be a little bit different, but you get the general idea. So some guy, Jones, was responsible for putting the PCBs in the Hudson River back in the 1960s, and yet in the 2010s, some guy, Smith, loses his job because of that, right? He perhaps maybe even loses his pension, right? But he wasn't directly involved in the PCBs in the Hudson back in the 1960s, yet he's being, in a sense, punished for it. Maybe he's entirely opposed to it. Maybe he's working against that. But that doesn't matter because he's a member of the same group, the same entity, that is the same corporation. So I think we can all agree this kind of thing does happen from time to time. The question is it due to something we might term group karma or collective karma? Now second, now that we have some idea as to what group karma is, the question is, do we find this concept, let's say, in early Buddhism in particular? Well, I would argue we do not. The scholar Wilhelm Habfas claims that actually the concept originated with the Theosophical Society, which was founded in the late 19th century. Instead, what we find in early Buddhism is perhaps best expressed in one famous passage in the Dhammapada, where we read, "For it is by oneself that evil is done. One is corrupted by oneself. It's by oneself that evil is not done. One is purified by oneself. Purity and impurity are personal matters. No one can purify another." Now, within early Buddhism, we do occasionally find examples of what we've termed conjunctive karma in the past. That is, again, things that are done by groups, and each member of the group is therefore responsible. There's one case apparently in the Vinaya where it talks about thievery and how a group of monks may be punished for thievery that's been done by one particular monk. However, I think in that case, the idea is we're talking about a kind of a conspiracy of monastics. And in that sense, although not every monastic actually did the thieving, did the stealing, nevertheless, they're all implicated in the same kind of conspiracy. They're all, in that sense, intentionally doing the same act by proxy, right? They've all sort of gotten together and decided, okay, you're going to steal, and then presumably we're all going to benefit in some way. And that's, again, an example of conjunctive karma. People are actually working and acting together. It's not true group karma. And I think there's a reason why we don't find group karma in early Buddhism. That's because for the Buddha, karma was essentially an individual matter. It depended upon our intentions. Indeed, the Buddha famously said, "It is intention that I call karma." Karma depended upon what exactly we intended and the purity of that intention. Indeed, one of the 5 topics of regular reflection that the Buddha recommended was this: I am the owner of my karma, the heir of my karma. I have karma as my origin, karma as my relative, karma as my resort. I will be the heir of whatever karma, good or bad, that I do. So it seems that for the Buddha, karma is something that accrues to somebody as an individual, through their own intentions, and not as a member of some group or other. Unless, of course, as I've said, they're only incidentally a member of a group because they're actually intending the same thing that everybody else in that particular organization is intending. Now we might wonder why this is the case. Why for the Buddha karma was so closely related to individuals rather than groups. And I'll get back to that at the end. Now, thirdly, given that it seems we really can't find the concept of group karma in early Buddhism, what Buddhist sense, what early Buddhist sense, might we make of the concept? Is there anything we can make of it at all? And here I think we can come back to the Buddhist idea of non-self, indeed the Buddhist idea of the person in general. A person is a mass of ever-changing mental and physical aggregates. These mental and physical aggregates, these processes that come and go and are always changing. And to that extent, the mental aggregates, the physical aggregates that are present when somebody intends an action are going to be different from the ones that are around when the person, so to speak, receives the benefit or the punishment from that karmic action. And this is something that may remind us of what we've already said about collective or group karma, where the persons can be different. And here, I think one important discussion, one important debate between the Buddha and a Brahmin, or discussion between the Buddha and a Brahmin, helps to reveal some of the subtleties in the Buddha's position. In particular, in one sutta, the Buddha is asked about karmic results. A Brahmin asks the Buddha, "Master Gotama, does the person who does the deed experience the result?" The Buddha responds, "The person who does the deed experiences the result. This is one extreme, Brahmin." Brahmin responds, "Then does one person do the deed and another experience the result?" The Buddha responds, "One person does the deed and another experiences the result. This is the second extreme. Avoiding these two extremes, the Tathagata, that is the Buddha, teaches by the middle way, which is to say, by the laws of dependent origination." That is, this is all an ever-changing stream, as we've just said. The particular person who does the result is neither really the same nor different from the person who receives the benefits or the punishments. To see them as literally the same person is to fall into one extreme. To see them as literally two different people is to fall into the second extreme. And the Buddha rejects both extremes. Nevertheless, all of this is clearly causally connected by the laws of dependent origination. That is to say, it's not that there's no connection between the person who intends the act and the person who receives the benefit or the punishment. These are causally connected, and that's to say they're not literally the same, they're not completely different, they're simply causally connected. So with that all as background, we can perhaps begin to see another layer to the story here. Can we think of collectives? Can we think of groups, of organizations, corporations, nations, teams, as sorts of persons in a Buddhist sense? Can we think of them perhaps as having intentions that are over and above the intentions of the people that constitute them? Perhaps we can. Perhaps we can make some sense of that. On the other hand, it's not at all clear that we could make sense of these larger organizations having other aggregates. In other words, being persons in their own right, in the sense of having perceptions and consciousness and so on. And here we get into some of this vagueness, this question of the vagueness of what constitutes a person in anything, in Buddhism, but in real life as well. That trying to decide the precise demarcations of what is a person and what is not is a difficult matter, indeed maybe even an impossible matter. I did a separate video on that, which I'll leave down in the information box below. But in any event, nowadays we do have current debates over, for example, corporate personhood. Are corporations persons? Well, in some ways they are, and in some ways they're not. They're like persons in perhaps having the ability to make intentions and actions and so on. On the other hand, they're different from, for example, they're certainly different from the people that constitute them in many, many ways. One very famous example is that a corporation can go bankrupt without bankrupting its owners. Indeed, that's the whole reason why corporations were derived originally. So there are all kinds of subtleties here, and it's difficult for us to come up with a precise answer. The idea of group or collective karma also sometimes comes up in the context of issues, contemporary issues such as institutional racism or institutional sexism, where it seems like groups of people may be collectively implicated in some ongoing injustice without necessarily being directly aware of, at least aware of, their own intentions with respect to that injustice. Now, it's not clear to me in these cases of institutional racism or sexism, it's not clear to me whether these constitute true group karma or might constitute that, or might simply be an example of the kind of conjunctive karma that we discussed in the past, where each member is actually doing a kind of intention, but through ignorance is unaware of it. These are subtle issues and issues that I think deserve separate treatment, basically. In any event, the point here is that there may be some Buddhist sense to be made of larger collective selves. After all, the Buddha said that a self is just one of the world's usages, terms, expressions, and descriptions which the Tathagata uses without misapprehending them. In other words, if we understand that within Buddhism a self is just a manner of speaking, then why not extend that concept of self to larger institutional or organizational groups than simply individual persons? In that sense, perhaps we could make some sense over these notions of group karma, of collective punishment or collective guilt, or collective benefit for that matter. These larger collections are not quite real persons, but perhaps they're similar in important respects. Lastly, I want to discuss the question as to why I think the Buddha would have confined the idea of karma to individual persons rather than to collections of people. On the one hand, this may be partly due to the fact that many of us consider collective punishment to be unjust, that there is an injustice when one person does the act and another person, perhaps let's say the child of that person, receives the punishment for it. And in that context, it may be that the idea of group or collective karma simply doesn't really fit into this Indian notion of karma, which I think in its essence is supposed to at least express something like a kind of a perfect justice in some sense, that all the things that we do get their benefits and get their punishments, but that we don't get benefits and punishments from things that other people do. But more specifically to Buddhism, the theory of karma is in the service of a practice for personal mental purification. That is to say, what we have to work with, all that we have to work with, is our own intentions. And so therefore it's our intentions that are the key, the focus of our practice when we're dealing with karma in particular. More recent forms of Buddhism, however, have been more interested in a more collective sort of practice, a practice that's not devoted solely to individual purification, but more towards something we might term societal purification. And in that context, in the context where we're turning from the focus on an individual to the focus on the larger society, it may be that some concept like collective karma may be more useful and effective. As we turn more from trying to change our own individual intentions to trying to change the intentions of larger groups, perhaps the intentions of corporations, of countries, and so on. And to that extent, to that end, I have a group of videos on society and politics, in particular in early Buddhism, and I'll leave a link to that playlist up here on the screen if you're not familiar with those. Some of these videos are a little old, but anyway, they're I think worth a view. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next video, and meanwhile, all of you, be well.